In tonight's news, the Prime Minister launches a major $930 million wastewater strategy for Amman and Zarqa that runs until 2025, reiterating the government's commitment to carry out basic service projects. As U.S. officials call the intervention in Syria a one-off intended to deter future chemical weapons attacks, governing world bodies urge all to return to the negotiating table. Swedish police arrest a 39-year-old Uzbek man on suspicion of ramming a hijacked delivery truck into crowds in central Stockholm in what they called a terror crime. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Prime Minister Hani al-Mulki launched a major $930 million wastewater strategy for Amman and Zarqa that runs until 2025. During the launch ceremony, Mulki said his government is striving to carry out basic service projects without any delays. He said the government's plans, priorities and programs follow three main tracks, namely cutting costs, developing the economy, and achieving growth and improving services for citizens. Mulki also commended major achievements in the water sector despite challenges from growing demands resulting from massive numbers of Syrian refugees in the country. Meanwhile, Minister of Water and Irrigation Hazem al-Nasser said the ministry continues to build wastewater treatment plants and sewage networks while also improving existing infrastructure. He added the new strategy's executive program will enable the ministry to cover new urban areas in Amman and Zarqa with sewage services and protect the environment. Treated water, Nasser said, will be used for irrigation and agriculture purposes in the Jordan Valley and South Amman. The Brussels Conference on Syria approved aid, grants and loans worth $39.7 billion for host countries of Syrian refugees, including Jordan, in 2017. This was according to a Ministry of Planning and International Cooperation statement that outlined the outcomes of the conference in Syria held in Brussels last week with the participation of 70 countries. According to Minister Ahmad Fakhoury, the international community pledged to Syria's neighboring countries $6 billion in grants, in addition to $3.7 billion for 2018-2020 and $30 billion as loans, of which $2.3 billion are concessionary loans. Fakhoury said Jordan's document, which was issued at the conference, included commitments made at the London Donor Conference, progress achieved in Jordan Compact, as well as maintaining international support. The document also included other commitments which were agreed on in 2016 that will be implemented this year. Fakhoury added that some $923 million have been made available as concessional loans, of which $834 million will support the national treasury and $89 million to finance development projects. Following the latest developments in Syria with the U.S. launching airstrikes, Britain's Foreign Minister Boris Johnson cancelled a visit to Moscow due to take place in 2 days. In a statement, Johnson said his priority now is to continue contacts with the U.S. and others in the run-up to the G7 meeting on the 10th and 11th to build coordinated international support for a ceasefire on the ground in Syria and an intensified political process. And while U.S. officials called the intervention a one-off intended to deter future chemical weapons attacks and not an expansion of the U.S. role in the Syrian war, governing world bodies remain at odds on the strikes, urging all parties to return to the negotiating table. More in this report.
Reactions are still mixed over Washington's missile attack on an airbase in Syria, which they asserted was the launch pad for the aircraft that dropped chemical weapons on civilians in Idlib province. The UN Security Council was divided as they met in an emergency session to debate the U.S.'s attack. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley and British Permanent Representative of the UN Matthew Rycroft held that the airstrike was justified and at the same time criticized Russia for its support of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
Russia has given Assad everything he could dream of. Without Russia's 7 vetoes in the Security Council, defying the views of other members of this council, Assad would now have faced sanctions and justice. And what did Russia get for its unconditional support? Assad ignores Russia's requests for him to obey a ceasefire.
Haley said that the U.S. is prepared to do more, but hopes that will not be necessary. In the same meeting, the representative of Russia, Ambassador Vladimir Safrankov, said the consequences of the U.S. strike to international and regional stability could be extremely serious.
Washington has already chosen to take military action, which was undertaken when members of the Security Council had hardly left the UN building. We call upon the United States to immediately cease its aggression and to join those efforts being made for a political settlement in Syria and to work together to combat the terrorist threat.
Syria's deputy ambassador to the UN, Munzir, denied the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government and condemned the U.S. strike on his country and asked the U.S. to cease the aggression. At the United Nations headquarters, Secretary General Antonio Guterres appealed to all parties to show restraint to avoid adding to the suffering of the Syrian people. A United Nations spokesman issued a statement on behalf of Guterres that expressed the Secretary General's concern and called for continued political talks to reach a solution to the crisis.
He says he's been following reports of the airstrikes against the Shayrat air base in Syria conducted by the United States. Mindful of the risk of escalation, the Secretary General appealed for restraint to avoid any facts that could deepen the suffering of the Syrian people. These events underscore his belief that there is no other way to solve the conflict than through a political solution. The Secretary General calls on the parties to urgently renew their commitment to making progress in the Geneva talks. A political solution also remains essential for progress for fighting against terrorism.
In a not very surprising response, North Korea said the U.S. missile strikes were an unforgivable act of aggression that showed its decision to develop nuclear weapons was the right choice 1,000,000 times over. North Korea considers Syria a key ally, and their news agency, KCNA, said its leader and the Syrian president exchanged messages of warm wishes and pledges of friendship and cooperation. The Pentagon released satellite images of what it said was the aftermath of the strikes, confirming that up to 20 Syrian aircraft were destroyed, along with fuel sites and a surface-to-air missile system. The images and the news of the strikes drove some protesters to be up in arms in the streets of New York and Chicago, where they criticized Trump's actions and chanted, "Hands off Syria."
I'm out here because Donald Trump and the U.S. government has no right to drop bombs on the people of Syria. Logic 101, bombing a country is not humanitarian aid.
However, in California, the Syrian American community praised Trump, saying he had every right to launch military action against Syria.
Somebody needs to help Syria. If America didn't help Syria to end the war, then things are going to stay exactly as they are. Syrians are dying left and right, and sadly, nobody cares about them. But at the same time, we love all the Syrians, no matter who they are or what sect or religion. And we hope that our President Trump in America will help the Syrians and help solve the problems in Syria.
Tensions are high and reactions are mixed on both the chemical attacks on civilians in Syria and the U.S.'s swift response with missile strikes. However, the world body is still pushing for diplomacy and a return to the negotiating table to find a solution to the Syrian crisis and put an end to the bloodshed of innocent civilians. Nancy Khair for the News at 10.
Meanwhile, the fourth phase of the exodus of Syrian fighters and their families got underway in Al-Wa'ir, the last opposition-held district in Homs, with some 2,500 people expected to leave. The evacuations are part of a deal with the Syrian government, brokered by Russia. Some 300 evacuees were seen queuing to board buses that would move them to Jarablos in Aleppo province. Under the deal, as with others that have been previously agreed for besieged pockets, insurgents are able to leave with light weapons along with family members and other civilians who choose to depart. Moving to Iraq, where Mosul residents continue to flee the city, filling the already overcrowded humanitarian camps in Iraqi-controlled areas. An Iraqi non-governmental organization said it has been receiving up to 9,000 people a day and distributing them among 5 of its camps in the area. Most of the fleeing civilians come from liberated districts, but some people from neighborhoods still under Daesh's control are increasingly attempting to escape and reach a camp. Witnesses said Daesh have killed dozens of civilians attempting to flee Mosul in recent days, hanging several dead bodies from electricity poles as Iraqi forces fight to retake the city.
Daesh mingled amongst people, preventing anyone from fleeing. We fled Mosul when we could not afford to pay rents anymore. We could not escape before, but yesterday we seized the opportunity when planes came to bomb and we fled. Daesh usually opened fire on cars, killing drivers and puncturing their tires to prevent people from fleeing.
Sweden's King Carl Gustaf said he is shaken by yesterday's vile truck attack in which 4 people were killed and scores injured. In a speech outside the Royal Palace in Stockholm, the king said the number of people willing to help after the deadly truck attack are many, many more than those who wish the country harm. Sweden will continue to be safe, he said.
We are all shaken by what has happened. At the same time, seeing people's concern for one another gives hope. It shows this force in our society. Those of us who want to help are many more than those who wish to harm us. That knowledge gives me comfort. Unfortunately, we have experienced many acts of violence before, and we have coped, and we will now too. Sweden has long been, and will continue to be, a safe and peaceful country.
Meanwhile, Swedish police arrested a 39-year-old Uzbek man on suspicion of ramming a hijacked delivery truck into crowds in central Stockholm. The man, who killed 4 and wounded 15, was previously known to Swedish intelligence services as a marginal figure with no clear links to extremist groups. Police said he appeared to have acted alone, but are not ruling out that more people are involved. A suspicious device was also found in the vehicle, but it is not yet clear whether it was a homemade bomb. Local authorities in Stockholm said 10 people, including a child, were still being treated in hospital, with 2 adults in intensive care. Sweden, which had flags at half-mast on buildings including the Parliament and Royal Palace, will hold a minute's silence on Monday to mourn the dead. Police also said they were maintaining a heightened presence.
Had an erased threat number 3 on the 5 scale so far, and this could include that a terrorist attack like this would happen. If we have immediate information that another terrorist attack could occur, then we could raise the threat level to a high level. We are still at a raised level, and we will follow it very carefully all the time, and if it's necessary, we will take proper action in this matter.
Back here at home, Minister of Environment Yassin Al-Khayyat announced the launch of a 2-year national cleanup campaign dubbed Our Environment is Our Life. The campaign, organized by the Ministry of Environment, will target all of the kingdom's governorates, parks, main streets, touristic sites, forests and nature reserves. The cleanup campaign seeks to end this alien prevailing state of carelessness towards the state of cleanliness in the country. It also aims to turn every citizen into a guardian that protects our forests, parks, streets, markets, universities and schools from littering. Beijing started a landmark reform drive to discourage hospitals from selling drugs to earn money. Made across 3,600 medical institutions, the reforms also include raising prices for certain clinical treatments. The reforms also standardized healthcare pricing, such as raising the costs for certain high-risk treatments and surgeries and increasing the compensation to nurses and traditional Chinese medical doctors. Moreover, it addresses the problem of information isolation between hospitals and introducing an interconnected database that provides medical, drug and insurance data. It also aims to improve the quality of healthcare services and administration. The reforms, which aim to improve the quality of medical services, are regarded as some of the boldest policy moves in the city's health industry to date. The tick-tock of London's Big Ben will stop for several months as the tower undergoes essential repairs, the biggest in decades. Refurbishment work began today, and it is estimated that work will last 3 years. Officially named the Elizabeth Tower, the structure is one of London's most famous landmarks. The $42 million renovation will include work to repair corrosion to the cast iron roof and to stop water seepage that threatens to damage the stonework on the iconic 160-year-old building. The huge clock has run almost uninterrupted since 1859. Also in the UK, a fleet of colourful hot air balloons left the English coast for France, attempting to break the record for flying over the English Channel. 85 balloons took off from Dover in Kent and landed in fields between Calais and Boulogne-sur-Mer on France's Côte d'Opale. The previous record for the number of balloons flying over the Channel was 49, achieved in the UK in 2011. The United States reduced their deficit to 1-2 when Steve Johnson and Jack Sock beat Australia's Sam Groth and John Peers 3-6, 6-3, 6-2, 2-6, 6-3 to keep the Americans' hopes alive in their Davis Cup quarter-final tie in Brisbane. Following yesterday's defeats, the U.S. had to win the doubles to extend the match into tomorrow's 2 remaining singles matches. Groth and Peers dominated the 4th set to level the match, but successive breaks of Peers' serve gave Johnson and Sock victory after 2 hours 35 minutes of play. Tomorrow's singles are expected to feature Kyrgios against Sock and Thompson against Isner.
263.
Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton of Great Britain stormed to pole position for tomorrow's Chinese Grand Prix after clocking the fastest ever lap of the Shanghai circuit in the dying seconds of a hard-fought qualifying session today. The triple world champion lapped the 5.4-kilometer-long circuit in 1 minute, 31.678 seconds in his Mercedes, edging Ferrari rival Sebastian Vettel of Germany by 0.186 seconds. Hamilton's Mercedes teammate Finn Valtteri Bottas was third, just 1/1000th of a second slower than Vettel. Hamilton's fastest lap in Shanghai bettered Michael Schumacher's 2004 time by over half a second. And finally, the weather outlook: relatively cold conditions continue tonight in the hilly areas and Badia, while it will be fair in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea with northwesterly light winds. Tomorrow it will be fair in the hilly areas and relatively warm in the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea with partly cloudy skies and northwesterly moderate to brisk winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively hot conditions tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. Before we end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. The Prime Minister launches a major $930 million wastewater strategy for Amman and Zarqa that runs until 2025, reiterating the government's commitment to carry out basic service projects. As U.S. officials call the intervention in Syria a one-off intended to deter future chemical weapons attacks, governing world bodies are urging all to return to the negotiating table. Swedish police arrest a 39-year-old Uzbek man on suspicion of ramming a hijacked delivery truck into crowds in central Stockholm in what they called a terror crime. With this, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Dana Absham. Thanks for watching and have a good night.